Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, Climbinator 1978 or 1978, whichever way you want to pronounce it. Now I bet you're wondering why I have my screen like this. That is because I have just finished watching a documentary. The documentary I've just watched is that it's a documentary based around an abandoned DC Comics film from the late 1990s. Now, just a little recap. The Superman film franchise, it struggled to launch a new film at the time after the failure that was Superman 4, which was the last appearance of Christopher Reeve prior to his accident. Now, from the late 80s and through the 1990s, there were many attempts to try and get a fifth Superman film done. None of them actually made it off the ground, but there was one that came very close. And that film was called Superman Lives, initially called Superman Reborn. It was originally written by Kevin Smith, but then he got redrafted by Wesley Strick and some other geezer. And the thing is, Superman Lives, well, judging by this documentary I've just watched, Superman Lives was going to be one crazy experience. So I'm just changing the settings on my PlayStation. Anyway, yes, according to the documentary, Superman Lives was going to be one crazy experience of a film. The film was going to be directed by Tim Burton, who did Batman 89 and Batman Returns. Now, good films they are, but look how crazy Batman Returns became. Superman Returns, not Superman Returns, Superman Lives, judging by the documentary I've just watched, was going to be every bit as dark and macabre as Batman Returns. Now, the documentary is 1 hour and 45 minutes long. But the thing is, it goes into a lot of detail about what went on behind the scenes. But what it doesn't do, really so much, is go into details about the film's plot narrative. Which is a real shame. Because there are plot details it does leak out, but it doesn't say, oh, this part happens in this part of the story, that part happens in that part of the story. No. What I can tell you though, is that you would have seen a total reboot of Superman. And it would have started off on the planet Krypton, getting destroyed like we all know, but not quite in the way that a lot of people outside of comic book fandom actually know it. It would have been destroyed by a computer AI known as Brainiac, who, if you don't know your lore about Superman, Brainiac is actually a very dangerous threat to Superman. He is possibly Superman's most personal and dangerous foe, outside of Darkseid. But then Darkseid's more of a foe for the whole Justice League, which was clearly being set up in this film, because a couple of the Justice League members actually do make appearances in the script, apparently. Batman was going to be one of them. And they go into detail about how Batman's appearance would have occurred. And it would have been when the city of Metropolis would have been mourning Superman's death at a citywide funeral. I'm going to get to that in a minute. And basically all of the city's monitors would have been hacked into by Batman doing a special broadcast and saying his words of condolence, because you know he's Batman. He can do that sort of thing. Anyway, the thing is, I think this film could have been a good film. I don't think it would have been a great film though. And I'm going to go into reasons why now. The film was going to be a reboot, as I said. It was not going to be connected to Christopher Reeve's Superman. Nope. Not connected to that timeline at all. Basically think Doctor Who with Superman, in that he's been regenerated. And it would have shown the destruction of Krypton, and then it would have gone to present day, where Clark Kent is working in Metropolis. And he's your typical Tim Burton outsider type. And the thing is, Superman was going to die in the first 15 minutes of the film. But his body gets taken to the Fortress of Solitude, kind of like Superman's Batcave, and via Kryptonian DNA, he gets resurrected throughout the remaining parts of the film. And he comes back to fight back against Brainiac's invasion in his regeneration suit. Now, as if that's not crazy enough, because you have Nicolas Cage taking on the role, a new actor taking on the role of Superman, and you kill him off in 15 minutes. The death of Superman story arc was a big hit in the early 90s, and the film was based on this storyline. Well, going to be based on this storyline. But the problem is, in order to do the storyline justice, you really need to have Superman's death occur a couple of sequels down the line to have its biggest impact, its biggest emotional impact. But the executive producer on this, oh boy, he was the real villain of this. Because that's where the story of the documentary itself gets interesting. See, the people who are interviewed, which is pretty much all the big important people involved in the film, sadly Nicolas Cage couldn't be interviewed in a more recent interview because this was done by Kickstarter, and it was done by a documentary professional, the late John Schnepp. And Nicolas Cage, I think, was said to be unavailable. But there has been an archival interview done with Nicolas Cage on some TV show where he was interviewed over another film, and he refers to his time on this Superman project. And the thing is, Nicolas Cage, back in the late 90s, actually had the build for Superman. He may not have looked the part facially, but that was the reason why Tim Burton cast him. Because he cast him because you'd never think of him as being Superman. And he had that long mullet at the time, Cage did. And a lot of people don't remember this, but at the time, Superman actually had a long mullet. So, I've seen photos, obviously, in the documentary of the film. And one of the photos, I remember this leaking out on the internet in the mid-2000s when the internet was still in its infant stages. And one of the early photos that leaked out of Nicolas Cage in costume for this Superman film was a really poorly shot Polaroid camera photo where he's in just really a prototype costume for what would have been his costume. It was just a prototype. It wasn't a costume that was actually going to be used in the film. It was just a prototype for it. So no wonder it looked like garbage. And Cage was blinking at the time the photo was shot. So therefore he actually looks like he's stoned. But watching the documentary now, I actually have seen the parts where they're doing the costume fittings on him, and the costume he ended up wearing, well, he was going to have like 4 different costumes, 4 different suits throughout the entire film. The first one, which is Superman's main costume in the comics, was only going to be worn in the first 15 minutes. But the thing is, he actually looked really good. He looked really awesome. And of course, you know, when Superman gets killed, he has a regeneration costume. So he's got all these like electric wires in the costume and all that. It looked typical 90s extreme stuff. And at the end of the film, he was going to have the red cape, black costume, and the Silver S logo, which is something us fans were screaming out for at the time. However, there was going to be some modifications to the costume, and this is where it gets really weird with Superman. And these were, I think, the demands of a certain executive producer, Jon Peters. Superman's logo was not just going to be his logo, but it was going to be a weapon as well. A boomerang type of weapon. His cape was also going to be able to be used as a disposable weapon. As Jon Peters says, he'd be able to use it as a weapon. He says this in the interview. He says that Superman would be able to use his cape as a weapon to do things like chop his enemies' heads off. I thought, you do realise this is Superman here? He doesn't do things like that. Jon Peters is basically the villain of the documentary. He said to all of his script writers, apparently, Kevin Smith in particular, that if you want your script to be commissioned for this film, you must meet 3 golden rules. 1. Superman is not going to fly at any point in this film. 2. He is not going to wear the costume at any point in the film. And 3, at the end of the film, he is going to fight a giant spider. The guy gets more insane as the documentary goes on. Like, there's one part of the film where Superman is dead and Brainiac crash lands in front of the Fortress of Solitude, which is Superman's home. And Jon Peters has demanded that Kevin Smith reads the script out. As Kevin Smith is reading out this part, Jon Peters says, "We need an action scene. Why can't Brainiac fight something at the Fortress of Solitude?" It boils down to Jon Peters demanding Kevin Smith that Brainiac fights Superman's guards. He doesn't seem to understand what a Fortress of Solitude actually is. He then goes on to ramble on about how he's a former cage fighter or something, cage fighter who's, won 500 street fights. And he wanted Superman to be this violent. He wanted Superman to be the sort of guy who would... He comes into work. He said, I would come into work, and the reason why I would wrestle my assistants to the ground is because I wanted that air of masculinity. I wanted to teach them that air of masculinity to the point where they knew that I came from a world where you not only saw your own blood, but other people's blood and smelt their blood. I thought, when I heard him say that, I thought to myself, that guy should not be in charge of a cake stand, let alone a film studio. Just take it from me. No one has any good words about Jon Peters in the documentary. And because of the way he meddled around with the Batman franchise, it led to Batman and Robin, which is a topic for another day. That led to Superman Lives cancellation, which probably is a good thing in a way, because of the wacky decisions he was coming up with. But it's a shame that Tim Burton never got to fully finalise his vision of Superman. Because some of the things Tim Burton comes out with, along with Nicolas Cage, actually sound really interesting. And I can see it with Superman. Superman seeing himself as an outsider to our world. Yeah. I would love their vision of Superman to come to life one day. So, yeah, I highly recommend digging out The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened. It's available for free on YouTube. And, you know, even if you're not really into comic book films that much, I'd say it's worth checking out because it gives you an insight into how Hollywood can screw up so badly sometimes. So, I'll give this a thumbs up.